Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here to continue our draft countdown series today. We're doing a position that the Ravens probably will not see a draft pick at tonight, tight end. And here to do that with me is Alec Puglianis. Alec, how you doing?
Doing well, Ken. I agree with you. Hopefully not a draft pick, but there's a couple people here in the later rounds that if we got, I'd be interested as a UDFA.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I'm always interested in filling that extra spot on the practice squad with a quality player. I think the Ravens did a good job last year getting Travis Vokolek. Did not think he would go undrafted and be available as a pick, but he was, and that was great. And then they, of course, lost him at late in the season to the Cardinals. But a guy who might have a future, we'll see. The Ravens, just talking about their current situation, they really had trouble finding playing time for their tight ends. And it obviously – they've had a lot of trouble finding targets for Isaiah Likely until Andrews got hurt. But they also had a lot of trouble finding playing time for Charlie Kolar.
That's right. I definitely thought there'd be more two tight end sets going into the year with what we saw at Likely in his first season. And then also, obviously, with Mark Andrews and just more of a passing game. They didn't really come to be, particularly, the two big tight ends in Georgia 2 years ago with Bowers and Washington. I was thinking, okay, we'll get some of that in the new offense, but maybe this year. I was a little surprised by the lack of that because I honestly thought that was the direction they were going with the signing.
And it may be where they come back to again this year. It's just there's a lot of overlap between Andrews and Likely and what they really do well, and a lot of it is flexed. Likely has a little more versatility, moving around. You could do that with Andrews, of course, as well, but you might be wasting some of his route running ability. Kolar is just a little frustrating to see they really couldn't get him on the field either. And part of that's his fault for not really developing too much as a blocker. But also part of it is that they just didn't have room. And the guy who we're not talking about today, or we haven't mentioned yet, is Patrick Ricard, who played a lot of inline tight end, essentially became the Ravens' big body at the end of the line a lot this last year.
Exactly. And I'll definitely say, Ken, when you look at these college prospects, I feel like there's, three molds that you're seeing a lot of now. You're seeing the traditional tight end. I don't even think there's like a true, big, huge inline guy anymore. I would say more traditional tight end because they're all getting lighter, I feel like. Then you have this more lighter move tight end that we're seeing more and more of in the league. And then you have these guys that are basically just wide receivers. I'm questioning how they're a tight end, particularly at the next level. And just basically big slots. So that's kind of what I've been starting to see as the college game progresses.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's only one guy on my list who I think fits the blocking tight end at the NFL level, and maybe also a little bit of a receiver, but mostly a blocking tight end at the NFL level. So we'll see how that goes. It is something the Ravens need to consider, and there's two replacements the Ravens need to consider. The first is Patrick Ricard, which I don't think will come as a surprise to anybody. That I don't think it will happen in 2024, but I do expect the Ravens to be moving in that direction in terms of trying to find a big body who's very athletic that can replace Ricard. And I do not think current position is a limiting factor, other than they'd like to be somebody who's up there close to 300 pounds because they've had so much success with that. But I think it could be a versatile defensive lineman. I think it could be an offensive lineman potentially who's not working out there, and they want to try and make it to something else. But it's I think the options are open, and this is the final year of Ricard's deal. So it's even possible he would be cut and they could save some cap dollars still in terms of where they are if they found the right guy before the season began.
Now, Ken, do you think you would go with more of a – so it sounds to me you would get more of a Ricard architect than a Juszczyk archetype because he's much lighter in the pants. And I found a guy that I thought was an interesting prospect in that regard.
It certainly could be either, and I wouldn't say no on a Juice type player. I think he gives your offense a different sort of dimension. Yeah. The Ravens went really high to get Juszczyk. I remember he was a fourth round pick, so I don't see the Ravens going that high in terms of the draft. But if they do, they probably got somebody picked out for exactly that role, and it would certainly mean the end of Ricard if we saw a fourth round tight end of that sort of variety. I guess I'd like to also say that I think Mark Andrews is at a crossroads this year. And he's coming up on the final year of his deal in 2025. The Ravens would save $11 million if they cut him. There's going to be tremendous pressure to do so, and particularly if Likely has a big year. They're going to be at a position where they have to either cut or extend him prior to 2025, because I don't think they can go with the 11 million next year. I think they either need to figure out a way to stretch that out and kick the money down the road, or they need to go ahead and move on from Andrews if they think they've got the tight end. So if they got some play out of Kolar this year, that would be obviously spectacularly good, and they might have to think about what do they do with Andrews. He has trade value, I believe, traded prior to 25 if he still has a good year this year, because he's only 11 million of salary. It's 11 million of salary from the Ravens. That's a lot, but 11 million to somebody else to get a star tight end, particularly when you could re-sign him, might not be too much. So it might be a player who you could, you get a mid-round pick for, maybe a 5 or something, if you really wanted to trade him. I'm not suggesting that's the optimal situation with Mark Andrews, but it'd be better if Likely, if you had a choice of one of those two really being a star, you'd be better off if Likely was the guy this year, because they've got another cheap year of Likely, and then they can extend him. Whereas Andrews, they really have to pay a lot of money in 25.
Right. Yeah, that's something I was thinking about, looking at the landscape of the timeline of tight ends and their contracts, is that, Likely and Kolar 1 year after Mark expires.
Yep.
Well, actually, no, they both expire
with Mark. They both with the 25.
They all go through 25. But I guess I was thinking, like you were saying, from the extension perspective, Mark would most likely get extended before playing like a last year's contract situation. So, that's an interesting trigger point. I would assume they would keep Mark around over Likely, but you don't keep both, is my assumption. And we'll see what they do. And I feel that's why I feel like maybe tight end this year is unlikely as a draft capital acquisition, but maybe as a practice squad, because next year would be the year that you would want to get the timeline moving again.
To reset with a younger tight end. Yeah.
In general, either as a second tight end or as a third tight end or first tight end, I guess. Even I imagine one of those guys is going to get re-signed. Just a matter of which one.
Do you think there's a chance I guess if they re-sign Andrews, they could even trade Likely. Then he'd have a lot more value, by the way, because he'd be in the last year of his rookie deal still, and it would be it's likely at 1 million or 1.5 million or whatever. He's a mid-round pick, so it'd be something just slightly over $1 million. Would be much better value than Andrews at 11 in terms of what kind of a draft pick you get in return for that, obviously.
Yeah, I just don't know what you would really realistically get, even as a good young tight end and all that. I don't know. I would think it would be no more than like a 5th or 6th, frankly.
Well, it depends on what his season is like. I don't think it'd be that little, because I think they just let him play out the season. If that were the case, I think he's got more.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, I was like, I'd rather keep him at that price. I don't know if anyone would pay more than that, even though he was a 4th round pick and has exceeded expectations. Right, it's just the way the market works.
Okay. Anything else I want to say about their general situation? I think we've hit on pretty much everything. There's only about 12 to 15 guys at tight end I think are going to be drafted. I did think that last year, though, and I don't know the final number. We did the tight end show together last year, too, didn't we?
Yeah. It was like 18 tight ends taken last year, I think.
It's just way too many for who that group was.
I don't know. I think there was a lot of good tight ends in that group. We saw a lot of interesting, like early young tight end production. But I would agree with you that some of the people that were drafted, I scratched my head because I thought they were just a guy. Yeah. So the number was inflated because they could have just waited, right? They could have gotten one of those same-ish players later than having to draft them. But a lot of them were drafted. Because I think our lists, covered maybe 14, and they were all drafted. Right.
So we had some offsets on us. We'll see how much of this we've had some offsets in these early shows, the draft countdown shows, which have led to some very long shows because we end up talking about 15 or 16 players instead of 11 or 12, just because of limited overlap. I predict more overlap this year, but let's see as we go through this.
I think so too. I think the end of the list is the most interesting because I'll say I disqualified some people because I didn't think they were tight ends. Okay. I don't think they're not good players. I just don't think they're tight ends.
Well, that's fair enough. And use whatever definition you want. Of course, I made my list in a for the Ravens basis. So I'm looking at a couple things here. Who makes sense for the Ravens given who I think they're trying to replace over time, and what kind of players they like, what kind of players fit in their offense. But that's how I did it. It's probably more significant at other places like wide receivers, where I really penalize or drop down some big slot receivers that I thought that really didn't fit the Ravens because of their tight ends.
Right.
But in your case, do it however you like. If there's anything you'd like to say about the way your list was created before you do number 10, go ahead and do that.
I mean, I guess I'll just say I basically just rank them as players in order of which I would like them on my football team, and my football team is the Ravens. Because of the timeline we said with these tight ends, I have no real preference for skills per se, because I feel like, we could use an inline, we could use a move tight end, but my preference has always been to look at move tight ends and see if they get better at blocking rather than the unathletic guys. Like one of my number one things I'll say is, like, sometimes I'm watching these tight ends and I'm like, you're not pulling away from the college guys and you're just showing, like, good hands for the quarterback. I don't think that's enough. Like, you're not a good enough blocker. You're not a difference maker, because I always want to find guys who put the defense in a bind. Do I have a linebacker out here because I'm trying to defend against a run? Do I have a safety and then I get overmatched? Like, I'm trying to find guys that, put you in a pickle. And some of these guys I feel like aren't athletic enough and they're not good enough blockers. And that kind of disqualifies them off my list. I'm basically always looking, you have to have some impressive athleticism for me to really consider you in my top 10.
Okay, well, fair enough. There's guys like that, and there's guys that are not like that in the tight ends available this year. But start us off with your number 10 guy.
Well, number 10 is like the number one, probably least athletic guy, but I think he could be an immediate 12 personnel starter, and that is AJ Barner out of Indiana/Michigan. We'll have a lot more slashes because of the transfer portal.
Yep.
6'6", 251. I think he's not that impressive an athlete, however, was very fluid with his movement. And I could definitely see him being an inline blocker and occasional help in the short zone passing game. There wasn't too much ceiling for him. He felt like just a good role player. Kind of equated him to maybe Boyle for us, who I thought played great for us, and we really appreciated him. But not that many people across the league probably cared about Nick Boyle, right? And that's kind of like what I said about AJ Barner.
All right. I had Barner on my list as well, and a little higher. Where did I have Barner at? Number 7. And so a few things about him. So first of all, in terms of what he was doing, he still played about 50% of his snaps wide, but that was more and that was at his first stop. It was about 2/3 at Michigan. At Indiana, he was about 50%. 2/3 in line at Michigan. Used as a pass blocker on 20% of snaps. By the way, if you want to figure out who can pass block, look at that number, try and figure it out for PFF. They've got the number of pass blocking snaps, and they've got his number of total pass snaps. And if you A over B, will give you the percentage of pass blocking. I think they may actually have the number there too. They may have a pass blocking percentage number there too. But 20% is very high, and it's a Michigan's offense is a little conservative in that regard. Obviously, they have some good wideouts there, but they did use him a lot as a pass blocker, that was true. And so the Boyle comparison may be fair in that sense. I don't think he's nearly the athlete that Nick Boyle was. I mean, I think he's not nearly the blocker that Nick Boyle is. Or was anyway. 480-440 is probably a lot like Nick Boyle at the time. His statistics as a receiver are not that impressive. 7.8 yards per target, 1.19 yards per route run. That's really not very good. 4.9 yak per route. Now, this is a problem I had with some of the big tight ends in this group is they go down very easy. And there's a couple good ones, but there's a bunch of bad ones. And him at 4.9 yak per reception is not very good. And 102.2 passer rating throwing to him. That's only 89.8 career, by the way. And he's had he's played at Michigan. They've had some decent quarterbacks there, haven't they? And they've had JJ McCarthy this year, and it certainly should be higher than that. I don't feel like he got so many targets that he became a bailout guy. In fact, when you're sitting there blocking, usually situations like that are Boyle-esque in nature result in much higher unmarginalized set of targets, meaning he hasn't gone through that process of adding contested catches because he's the bailout guy. He has mostly really good opportunities that evolve perhaps as a play goes on and is extended. But Barner receiving statistics are just not very impressive. Does have a modest drop total and a 50% career contested catch rate, which is okay. It'd be good for a wide receiver. It's okay for a tight end, is what I'd say is normal. Very small hands. He has 9-inch hands. If he was a quarterback, he'd be a fumble waiting to happen with those kind of hands. But he's a tight end that's unusually small there, and not a vertical threat. 9 missed tackles forced career on 64 receptions, I would say, is part of the reason why he's got a career yak per reception of only 4.2. It's 4.9 last year. I saw the use for him as an inline blocker. I think there are some gifts there, and I think you don't have some of the other red flags that exist with the tight ends at the bottom of my list with Barner, but then there's also probably a very limited upside to him as well. I had him at number 7.
That is something I think, Ken, you bring up a good point. There are so many people with red flags. Mm-hmm. And we won't even get through the top 10 without talking about 2 or 3 guys that have some huge red flags where they could be not even drafted because of them, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things where it's like, what are you willing to look past?
All right. Well, let me go to my number 10 guy because he's a red flag guy right away. And that's Erick All of Iowa, a guy who played 4 years at Michigan. So, Michigan swapping out tight ends like a hooker's underwear here. But Erick All went to Iowa for his last year, played in that Iowa offense known for 9-6 games. He's got an injury black dot in his case, a torn ACL versus Wisconsin after just 251 snaps in this last year. Only had 1,088 career snaps. That's in 5 years. That is not much. Had a couple different injuries during that college career. So he might be off a lot of people's boards, but he's definitely, before the injury, I think you'd call him athletically gifted. He's 6'4", 252, 33-inch arms, 10 and an 8-inch hands are nice and big. 8.8 yards per target in 2023 and 6.1 yak per reception. And here's the big one, 2.62 yards per route run. That's up there with the really good wide receivers in this class. There are a few guys over 3 in the wide receiver group, but that's exceptional. And 119.6 passer rating throwing to him, although only 87 in his career. So he didn't do nearly as well as Michigan. Must be something about playing there that holds down tight end passer rating there. Has some of the normal useful tight end characteristics, sitting down in space and whatnot. I think if he were to play for an under center play action team, that makes sense. But that was one of the reasons I really knocked him down a couple spots on my list, was that's not who the Ravens are. The Ravens, at least they haven't been, is to play under center play action. They're more of an extended play team. And Lamar was great in 2019 if they were playing that same scheme, which wasn't primarily under center, or was still primarily out of the shotgun, but they had a lot of play action in Roman's offense that year out of pistol. I think then you could see an Erick All being a useful player here in Baltimore, but to me he's more of an injury risk than the good things that you get out of him as a competent receiving tight end really are.
Erick All has surfed up and down my list trying to find a spot. It seems to me with your 10 ranking, you're just saying, I have to talk about him because he's too good not to, but he's a huge injury risk, right? I had him number 6. So basically, I just said, yes, he's a huge injury risk. We don't know what he might be after this latest, ACL tear. But like you were saying, when he was on the field, he looked really good. I think his Iowa pedigree showed in his blocking. He showed good blocking maturity. I thought those big mitts of his were well presented to the QB, had a natural feel for finding himself in space, and then the fluidity. After the catch, though, was a little bit to be desired. I thought he was a little stiff. But with all that being said, he was making big plays and a huge X factor. One fun thing about Eric All that I saw too was when I was looking at these prospects, as he transferred away, the guy who replaced him, they're like, Eric All did a lot of this when he was with the team. And I was just like, damn it, all these guys are just flying all around. Yeah. I remember when I was watching a cut up of the one guy, I was like, wait, why is this in here? It's like not even the same team. It's like, oh, he did go to 2 colleges. Okay.
Well, they went from All to Barner. Sorry.
It was All to Barner. Yeah.
All to Barner. All to Barner.
And
All had 4.8% pass blocking his entire career, and Barner had 20 in his last season at Michigan. So there was kind of a big difference in them. And Eric All is not what you'd really want as a run blocker. So you can compare an AJ Barner to a Nick Boyle, but if you started comparing Eric All to Nick Boyle, you generate a few snickers. So
and the thing of it too is Barner was playing next to Lovelall, who's going to be next year's like number 1 prospect probably. Yeah. Right. So there's that. Because I was looking at, I was trying to find yards per target. I guess it sounds like maybe PFF
I have to calculate it outside of what PFF has, but it's there. I mean, the yards and the targets are there, so you can get it.
Yeah, exactly. I was like having to find targets in different places and stuff like you said. Mm-hmm. Some lists were limited without paying. So that's why I found Melvin. I was like, oh yeah, okay, makes sense.
All right, let's move on now. So we're through the number 10 spot. How about your number 9 guy?
Number 9. Okay, that would be Tanner McLachlan. 6'5", 244 out of Arizona. Not the best athlete. That's the one thing to say about him. Very technically sound as a player, though, former wide receiver. The big thing is 31-inch arms, right? He needs to get stronger and to really marry his try-hard nature to be a difference in the blocking game. And if he looks a little weak. That's the biggest knock I have for him is that if he's not able to get stronger in an NFL program, he might not be viable. But if he does, I think he's so technically savvy and just like ephemeral as a player that he could be a high quality tight end. So that's why he's my number 9 prospect.
Okay, he was off my list. I have him in a category. I have a top 10, an honorable mention, and a no for the Ravens unless he drops a lot. And McLachlan, I specifically made the comment that I really only want him as a priority UDFA. So he'd be like Vokalek, kind of in that category. I wouldn't spend a draft pick on him. I think there's too many good lottery tickets at the bottom of the draft where you're getting, especially if you're the Ravens and you probably know something about some small school players. You have a better chance to get a guy than to use a 7 on a player like McLachlan, where I think there's others available. He did some things that were good. 11 missed tackles forced on 45 catches. That was good. 6.3 yak per route run is pretty good for a tight end. But he was used as a pass blocker on 18.6% of pass blocking snaps. I like that in terms of can you use him there? Of course, that also limits his value to the Ravens in terms of Ricard really is that guy for the Ravens, and McLachlan would be like another guy to do that here. One of the things that he just did not look as good at is really was not a good run blocker. And often what the tight end has to do is hold the line of scrimmage against the Sam linebacker. It's not an easy assignment versus a 3-4 in college. And how much they don't get caved in is really important. And McLachlan just was not a particularly effective run blocker this last year, which means he's really, to my way of thinking, not really the Ravens kind of tight end, even though he does some decent things as a receiver. And the 9.6 yards per target were good. 108 passer rating throwing to him. Sure, that's fine. And the 461 speed is, makes him so. I still think he's a project. You mentioned the strength issue. I think that would really have to improve, which means he's at least a year away. If you're going to do that, make him a UDFA and see if you can get him to work into the system that way. And at best, he's going to be the third Ravens tight end with an injury this season. You hope. You certainly hope you don't have two injuries at tight end.
Right. And it just doesn't seem like that'll be the case. Daniel Jeremiah says he's a mid-round target. So that, he has a lot of insight, in the league. So I feel like if he's hearing from teams that they're trying to target him, then he'll be gone and then not a candidate for the Ravens. But we'll see, I guess. I mean, like I said, there's plenty of people on this list that if they can get him as UDFA, absolutely bring him in, or in my honorable mention list as well. But yeah, I understand what you're saying about him and get why you'd have him lower, not on your board at all.
Yeah. It is funny because immediately,
hey guys, I want to tell you about the Eufy Video Lock. Because when I'm not podcasting, my day job is a smart home specialist. And the Eufy Video Smart Lock is perfect. This is what you guys need to go get. It replaces the deadbolt on your door. So now you can come home without fumbling with keys. You can just type in a code. Or, even better, use your fingerprint to unlock after 1 second. You put your finger there, pops out, my door's open. It's perfect. It also is an integrated video doorbell. We've all seen the video doorbells. We all know the ones that are out there. I've seen many of them get stolen. No one's going to steal this because it's your door lock. It's impossible for them to steal. There's no monthly fee. Other ones do. But this one, it'll record locally, so you never have to pay if you don't want to. The battery, it lasts up to 4 months. Plus, it notifies you ahead of time. And I mentioned earlier 1 second fingerprint recognition. No, I meant 1 second till it opens. The AI self-learning chip will learn your fingerprint even faster, and then it opens up. Completely keyless entry. No more keys. And I know I set this up as I'm a smart home specialist, but anyone can install this. All you need is a Phillips screwdriver. That's it. And then you're done. Guys, I love this product. Make sure you check it out. Now, here's the easiest thing to do. Just go on to Google or whatever you prefer and search Eufy Video Lock. That's EUFY Video Lock. Or visit eufyofficial.com/video lock to see how you can gain complete control of your door, just like me, just like Ken.
The light switch changes. UDFA, the cost of bringing a UDFA is almost nothing. So you basically have two costs. One is the dollar cost from your pool of dollars, and that actually can be more significant because it's a very limited pool, maybe 100, 150,000 in total they have to spend, and you can only spend, I think, up to 100 on one player. And they used to do this Ozzie Newsome add $1,000 at a time, and they got 20 people on the phones at once, and they're running in and saying, "Ozzie, can I have 2,000 more?" kind of thing, and they'd be doing this to get everybody signed very quickly. But the Ravens very good at this kind of a system, racing to get players signed on that Saturday night after the draft or just after the 7th round's completed. Yeah. That's
such a wild process, by the way.
It really is. Yeah, it's very could. I wish they'd give us the full insight into that. But to do so, you'd have to have like 20 guys mic'd up, and then you have to kind of splice it together. But imagine how good that would be if they the Ravens would not want that. They wouldn't want all their secrets out the window in terms of exactly how they do that. Yeah, but it would be very fun. But anyway, cost number one is the dollars out of your pool. Cost number two is the opportunity cost of the spot, and the Ravens are very conscious of that because they only really probably get one tight end on their practice squad, so they don't have an opportunity to sign two, and you certainly don't have the dollars to flip into two tight ends usually. So they'll it'll be there's going to be one deal. It's kind of like working with two guys you have in different rooms that you're making one into is going to turn on the other, kind of the prisoner's dilemma situation.
And anyway. I truly do think we will get at least one undrafted free agent. So that's like the $1 million question. Who will it be? Right?
UDFA tight end specifically. Yeah, yep. I would agree. All right. And if they don't, it's not like the Ravens haven't been playing the veteran tight end practice squad player game for a long time now. Sure. They've had about, I think it was like 6 of their guys had 6+ years of experience on their practice squad last year. Mm-hmm. All right. We're moving on to my number 9 guy, right?
Yep.
Okay. Let's go with Tip Ryman of Illinois. Let me get down to him here. You got him higher or not on the list?
I do have him higher.
Yeah, I liked him in a lot of ways, but let's talk about him a little bit. He's probably the guy I would talk about as being a prototype tight end that is more in the very big body, quite athletic. A lot of the things just have not worked out as a receiver. In such, and some of that may be Illinois and their other deficiencies on offense, whether it's a quarterback or on the offensive line, reducing his effectiveness. But 6'5", 271, 33-inch arms, all that's fine. 10.5-inch arms, that's 10.5-inch hands rather. That's terrific. A 464 40, 28 bench reps is very good for a tight end. If you adjust that for that arm length too, which is pretty good for a tight end, then I'd say that's a very exceptional bench strength number. And it might have been the highest of tight ends. I don't know if there was anybody else who is a little bit higher. Do you happen to know?
I don't know. No. But yes, he is clearly very strong. And I thought the strongest of the group from a strength perspective.
Now, that said, you get a guy who runs 464, 28 bench reps, and he's built at 6'5", 271. You'd figure him for some missed tackles force, 2 in 19 receptions. So only 19 receptions is a question as well. 8.5 yards a target. That's not good for a draftable tight end. That's not good anyway. Here's the really bad number: 0.84 yards per route run. So he wasn't really a focal point of the Illinois offense, but that also meant that his target shouldn't be marginalized. And so he should have done better on a per target basis, I would have thought, than 8.5. 5.5 yak per route run, not exceptional. And obviously that's not a good thing because he's got a bunch of lean forward yards at that kind of size. But here's the good number. The good number is 141.5 passer rating throwing to him, and that's 117.8 career. Probably a little bit like Nick Boyle. And if you look back at Nick Boyle's career, had some terrific years of passer rating throwing to him. Rarely was he a guy who got a play action target over the middle that was a high probability of interception. And that's Ryman really as well in terms of not having a lot of those. For the size he is, not a great run blocker, which is a little unfortunate. Now, I read some stuff and then I tried to watch a cut up and really see what I would see on this. And I'd say struggles in level 2 to line up blocks is probably the fairest assessment of them. Is that there's some people who get out in space and they have a problem because they're not decisive, and I see that in offensive linemen all the time. There's other guys who get out in space and they just have trouble, but they move laterally at a rate that is not fast enough to line up that block well, and they end up lunging. And it's usually something I associate with offensive linemen, and not somebody who's a relatively nimble 6'5", 271. Actually, it's a big man either way, but he lunges too much in space, and I would not really expect that to be the way in which he fell short. But that's what I saw. I'd say his reps in the run game when you're at the line of scrimmage look a little bit like Ben Cleveland. They're split between these great push situations, and he certainly had plenty of them. And also these frustrating cross his face snaps where it's like, why isn't, you are too big to let that smaller edge player, in his case, cross your face and get in the backfield. Why did that happen? And with Simpson, it happens at guard, and it's frustrating as hell that a defensive tackle is winning across his face so easily when he's so big and can put so much mass on his opponent. But Ryman is the same case. It's a player's too big for that. Certainly will be drafted with his freakish athleticism. He's still kind of a project. He's the guy in this draft I would point to is he could be Ricard's replacement, but the Ravens would have a multi-year project on their hands to try and figure it out. And that might be okay because Ricard's here for 24 and Ryman could start being the guy in 25.
Yeah. I mean, Tip was number 4 on my list, and he moved up from number
4 on your list, you say?
Number 4.
Yep.
Yeah, he moved up from number 4. He was lower on my list. I think I forget, maybe like 7. And I just started looking at my list and I said, no, I would like him better. I like him better. And one of the big reasons why is, like you said, he moves so well for his size. I don't look up their measurables first. I watch him first. And then I saw he was 271. I couldn't believe it because he moves so well. And then, like you mentioned, he could be much better at striking and blocking. That's the big thing he needs to develop. But I do see him as an inline prospect. He was actually the one I had the Boyle the Boyle comp too, where I was like, I don't know if he'll ever be a star, but he could be very solid and well regarded for the team he's on. And I mean, just the way he moves people when he does get engaged with his strength, I thought was really impressive. Yeah, and I just was like I said, very moved by his ability to move. I just couldn't believe he was as heavy as, because like I said, you're watching all these guys that are at 240, 250. That's what the majority of these guys are. And then for him to be so much heavier and move as well as he did, it was very impressive to me.
All right, well, fair enough. And I would not argue with a higher placing of him on the board for the Ravens. I do think he gets drafted. I'd put it, I want the Ravens to wait for value. So I don't have a problem with them spending a 7, probably not even a 6 on a player like Ryman, but I wouldn't want them to go any higher than that. I think the likelihood is he's going to be drafted before then. But I don't have a fear of that, by the way. All my boards, basically, people are going to say, he'll never last that long. Basically, I found myself saying that on a lot of these shows, and I'm like, I don't care. Someone will draft and be that kind of value to the Ravens, and that'll be the guy they want. But as soon as you peg yourself to a single guy like Ryman or like any of the wide receivers who, there's a lot of guys who could fit for the Ravens as wide receivers. As soon as you do that, you're becoming a need guy and not a BPA guy. Be a BPA guy. Find out who that real value guy is and demand exceptional value out of the drop. That's how the Ravens got Travis Jones and Justin Madubuike at incredible value. And Kyle Hamilton.
Kyle Hamilton. Yeah. Even their number 1 pick could be an incredible value. Yeah. And we'll talk about that when we talk about Bowers later. It's like I was doing the thought experiment of like, when will he go? And he could be late. So I'm getting at like not like he won't
not out of the first round. But,
he won't escape
late.
The first round. Yeah. But it's like if he falls, because classic mock spot is 18 to the Bengals. And it's like, could he get to 18? Maybe. Like it's not crazy to say he'll get there. So, anyways.
Okay, we're going to go to number 7, and then we'll cut the show off and do a second. But take us through your. I guess we're up to your number 8 guy, right? Unless you have more to say about Ryan.
No, I like them. So number 8 for me. All right, this is a guy that's much higher on everyone else's board but mine. Theo Johnson out of Penn State, 6'6", 259. He's been a riser due to his physical workouts. To me, he always looked clunky on the field, and I just. Over the years, whenever I find a guy who has, really good measurables, but didn't look dominant in college, it's a big red flag for me. Because those guys have never worked out for me, like going forward. Like whenever I have tried to hitch myself to believing in the progress, it doesn't happen. So yeah, just a little lower. He lungy to me in blocking and can be shed pretty well, even though. He has the build to be a solid blocker and has shown glimpses of solid blocking. There's a couple like technique things that need to be cleaned up. There's this interesting story about him punching a frat member that led to a concussion. Don't know how often that happens, but it's something I saw and I was like, okay, that's interesting. Might be completely off the Ravens board for that reason. Who knows? Yeah. So definitely the guy I know I might be wrong about. Because, like I said, I've seen him at 3, I've seen him at 2, in other people's boards, but I just couldn't get him there.
Okay, so for starters, I do like him. I want them to get him later if they got him, but I have a 5th round value grade on him. Remember, that's a value grade. That's not where I think he'll go. Right. I think he could well go in the 3rd round. But anyways, my number 3 tight end on my list, just going up to check that first. There's a lot to like and there's a lot to dislike. And the athletic measurables are obviously a 4.57 40 top shuttle, which is really good lateral movement. He's displaying their vertical and broad jump with that explosiveness. 10.25-inch hands, so he's got the right hand size you want at tight end. Still has a total project of a player. One of the things, and route running is mentioned, and so I try to focus on that when I'm watching some Penn State stuff. And the thing I see is really telegraphs his deceleration. So when you have a tight end receiver, whoever you're doing, who comes back for the ball, sticks a foot in the ground, whatever. You'd love to have Zay Flowers in every one of your receivers who can, immediately go to a point, stick his foot in the ground, change directions at 90 degrees or even more, right. and cut back towards the quarterback and make a play on the football, and the guy's lost. You can even more like it that the guy gets to the top of the stem, your receiver tricks or waits until the defender gets off leverage and then makes his move. That's really having wiggle at the top of the route. And then your third kind of guy, he's playing his own cards entirely. And he gets to the top of the route and he cuts. And he's not very sudden. And Theo Johnson is certainly not very sudden. In fact, he kind of has this pity pat thing going on that I saw in a couple different tight ends in this draft, where he slows down to decelerate, meaning he taps his feet to decelerate on the way down. You got to basically be able to decelerate more quickly like that, sit in the chair and erupt out into your break. That's just not him. And a lot of tight ends do have trouble with that, by the way. They can sometimes cover it by slowing down with their steps as they're getting there, not taking them at full speed, but he's a guy who basically, honestly, I think he gives it away to the player who's covering him, and that's the big reason why he really hasn't broken through as a wide receiver yet. In 2023, 7.6 yards per target, 1.22 yards per route run. That's just not a top tight end number. 5.0 yak per reception. By the way, decelerating like that, even if you catch the ball, you're being taken down right away. So that's one of the issues with that. 136.2 passer rating throw it to him. So it wasn't like that created a lot of interceptions, and 139.9 career. So he's been effective from that perspective. By the way, I don't know if we talked about this. I don't think we did. The Ravens last year had a passer rating throw into tight ends of over 140, 12 touchdowns, no interceptions. And, I talked about, the marginal targets. Well, yeah. Andrews was out a large portion of the season, and there are fewer marginal targets going to tight ends this last season. It really paid off for the Ravens. So they had a wide receiver focused offense, more of a spread offense, and Lamar was less afraid to throw the ball outside the numbers. And that meant that the tight ends had more room to play. And what happened was they went from, I think, 195 targets to 110 from 22 to 23. And now I feel like the most hypocritical guy on earth saying, boy, I want more tight end targets. Well, no, that the additional targets will probably be marginal targets. And so you really kind of want a balance there that makes sense. And it made for an MVP season out of Lamar that he wasn't throwing a bunch of interceptions in the middle of the field to Andrews, as had been his wont in recent years. That he'd particularly, I think it was 21, he threw 9 interceptions throwing to Andrews.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a little more on Theo Johnson here.
Yeah.
So 7 missed tackles forced on 76 college catches is really subpar. That feeds into that yak number. What do I have to say? 13.2% of pass snaps as a blocker at Penn State. Not particularly high or low. That was actually a median rate for all tight ends in 2023 was 13.2%. So when you hear us talking about that the rest of the show, that's kind of a average basis for that. I don't think the Ravens go after him, even though he's fairly high on my list. I think whoever gets him, if they have a good tight ends coach, could get a good player out of him, because he's got a whole lot of headroom in terms of ability to develop from where he is right now with those tools.
Surely does. And I think the big thing you mentioned kind of with his route running is I felt like he was lumbering out of the break, and he kind of winded and rounded off a lot of his routes. And like you mentioned, slow down. And that was just like it's a weird thing, like, I don't know. He plays so much slower than his athleticism suggests. Mm-hmm. And I just don't know what is that bad coaching or what, because you would think he could be a lot better. So like you said, he has a lot of high headroom, and a guy I'm willing to be wrong about. And, as a guy who like hopes for everybody to be great, like do well and prosper. Like, I hope he does figure it out, but just didn't have the confidence in him, particularly with some of these guys at the top of the board. I find them like quite interesting. Like, they've been really productive in college, or they've been, they have good projections going to college or, the next level. So yeah, I struggled with him. I really I wanted to put him higher. I just didn't manage. I could say I'd probably get him up to 6. If I were to rejigger it.
All right. Well, that's fine. We don't have to have the same board. That's part of the fun of it. Yeah. I think we've got the same guys. No, I had one guy who was not on my list so far, and I'm sure you'll have one coming up here. I'll go to my number 8 guy, because he was your number 8, right? Theo Johnson?
Yeah, Theo was number 8. Yep.
Okay, so my number 8 is Dallin Hooker of Colorado State. Okay. 6'3", 241, 10.25-inch hands, good, nice long arms at 33 and 5/8. 478.40, that's fine. 683 3-cone is his amazing number. That's a slot cornerback number. So if you want lateral movement, he's one of your guys in this draft. He finished at Colorado State after 3 years at BYU. Interesting. That's an interesting move, by the way, but we can talk more about that later. 7.3 yards per target in 23, 1.58 yards per route run, not exceptional. 78.5 passer rating throwing to him. And that was based on 6 touchdowns and 6 interceptions as well. Now, one of the things I did not do for him, and it's very hard to do for any player, is to try and go back and find the interceptions on balls thrown to him. That's a very difficult thing to do. If somebody would put together that cut up, I'd love to see it, because I really want to see, did he tip some balls for that to happen? Did he go up too high and maybe get a piece of balls? Was the ball get taken out of his hands or whatever? But I don't know why it happened, but I'm suspicious that it was his problem. But playing at Colorado State, little more of a focal part of the offense, not the entire offense by any stretch. Was he just a guy they were going to as a bailout guy? Mm-hmm. I got more, but you want to respond?
I think he might have been. I mean, he got a lot of targets in their offense. I'm trying to see. I thought it was like 21% of targets, which feels high for a tight end.
That is high. That's like the Mark Andrews number.
Yeah, but I agree with you, because of the way he plays. If you watch him, it wouldn't surprise me if he's causing some of these interceptions, because he has such good hand-eye coordination. He might be cocky with it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, he makes some absolutely absurd catches, and he maybe he's trying a little too hard sometimes.
He is another guy, by the way, who's on my list as having very poor deceleration characteristics. So another possible reason, and again, don't have a way to really go back and check this, is that he's decelerating poorly, and that's allowing not the cornerback, generally speaking, but whoever's covering him, whether that's a safety or whoever it might be, to break on the football a little easier. He's giving things away to the coverage player. But interesting, at BYU, he did not force a single missed tackle in 3 years. He goes to Colorado State and he had 15 as a senior. And yet his yak is still only 5.9 yak per reception. So it didn't really create a bunch of breakaway plays from that. Only pass blocked on 6.1% of the plays. So that's obviously just saying he's important as a receiver to them. It could also be an indictment of his pass blocking, but either way, he's more important as a receiver. The good hands, I would have said, is one of his positive characteristics. But if you look at what he does, he's going to kind of have to be a Swiss Army knife at the next level. Size-wise, who he is at 6'3", 241, he's on the smaller side. Could be a move tight end guy. Could be a guy who, is in the backfield at times. Could be a guy you are comfortable having inline or flexed. But I think he's going to have to have several hats to really earn some playing time at the NFL level.
Correct. And I definitely saw what you're talking about with his route running. A lot of wasted motion. For as good of a mover he is with the ball in his hands, not the best mover when it's not. He was number 7 on my list, so not far off. One of the things I was surprised you didn't bring up, and I think is a big red flag, the big breakout year of his was his year 24 season. So he's older. So late breakout for him, and that's always a concern, right? Yeah, the other guy I kind of struggle with placing, because, like I said, with all these guys with like weird red flags, like Eric All, with his injuries, and Holker with his breakout age, Theo with his like not quite there with the production given his physical traits. I was like really struggling with those guys, like figuring out like where am I going to put you, like how far I want to move you and all. But the thing that was crazy is I don't think it's hyperbole to say, if you watch the highlights of all these players, that Holker might have the best like reel. Just absolutely crazy plays that he makes. Super impressive. And, that happens. So that's good for him. But like you said, there's a lot to work on with him. Another project player.
So Holker is I can't find his birthday, by the way, looking on here online. that usually, by the way, is a bad thing. You know, a lot of players, if you look them up, particularly if it's a younger player, their birthday will be out there all over the place, and it'll say, 2003 was his birthday, and it's a
number one on the resume.
Yeah, it's one of your big CV items you want to put up in bold print. But yeah, when you're 24, you don't want that anywhere near you. So I don't know who's going out there, whether they have people that are cleaning up his Wikipedia or they're doing other things to try and delete his birthday from it. But I could well be. Do not put it past people, because they don't want age to become the reason why you don't draft somebody. But that's a good catch there. Where did you find his age, dude? Do you remember?
It was a YouTube video. Yeah, okay. I was watching a YouTube video to try to get a little bit of another perspective, basically because of Theo, and they brought up his age. The other thing too is some of the measurables too. It was a good resource to just like get arm length and things of that nature, hand size.
Okay, so and you had who at number 7?
Holker. Yep.
Holker, and I had Barner at number 7. So we'll cut it off right here. We'll break this into 2 parts, as we've been doing during this draft countdown show series. Alec, really appreciate you coming on. It's always a pleasure to talk football with you. Why don't you tell people where they can talk with you online and where to find your podcast?
Sure. You can find the podcast at OneWinningPod, onewinningpod.com, and follow us on Twitter there. And you can follow me as well at A.
All right. Alec, a great guy to talk football with. If you haven't given their pod a try, I'd recommend them. It's very relaxed. A few tech guys talking football, basically, is how I would describe it. Fair enough?
Yeah, that is fair. Yeah, and friends too. Yeah, that's how we all met. But yeah,
so it's a good show, and all of them, Peter and Chris as well, have been on the show as well, and I happen to know them personally. It's a fun group of people, and I highly recommend giving their pod a try if you can. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study Short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. If you want to do something related to the draft, hit me up very soon. I have to figure out how to get it in, particularly if it's a pre-draft item. If it's a post-draft item, like how have the Ravens done in some way, or why didn't the Ravens draft such and such, there's still plenty of time to do that afterwards. And I'll be restarting the Recollections series after the draft and doing that through basically the end of the dead period before camp. So if you want to do a talk about a player who played for the Ravens anytime in their first 28 years, hit me up and we'll do that. But particularly a guy who's not on the Ravens and is not on the Ravens Mount Rushmore of players is who we're looking for. And in particular, if you know anyone who wants to do a pre-2000 player, that'd be great. Alec, thanks again for joining me.
Yep.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.